Ever had that moment
Yeah.
where maybe a gesture, something totally fine to you, just lands wrong with someone from a different background?
Oh, yeah.
It can just derail things, right?
Yes, definitely.
Especially trust, before you even get started.
Definitely.
So today, we're diving into exactly that trust and psychological safety. These often invisible things that are so crucial.
Glue, really.
Yeah, the glue. And we're looking at how maybe our own default ways of doing things might actually be, well, getting in the way,
Mhm.
especially when working with diverse teams or clients.
And we've got some really great insights for this, drawn from the work of Jennifer Kumar.
Jennifer Kumar. Her background sounds perfect for this topic.
It really is. She's an ICF-certified coach. That's the International Coaching Federation, and she actually spent 7 years living and coaching over in India.
7 years. Wow, that's deep experience.
Absolutely. So she brings this invaluable global perspective. And her work, especially coaching teams down in Kerala in India, it offers really practical strategies, not just abstract ideas, things you can actually use.
Okay, practical is good.
Yes.
So what's our main goal here? What do we want people listening to take away?
Well, our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to unpack how trust actually gets built. The mechanics of it. Show you how you can genuinely adapt your own communication style to connect better across different backgrounds. And, maybe the biggest thing, how to start tripping over those frustrating misunderstandings.
Right. Avoid projecting our stuff onto others.
Exactly. We're aiming for actionable understanding, some solid points to maybe reflect on, and hopefully maybe even a surprising insight that sticks with you.
And it feels really timely, too. I heard the ICF, the big global coaching body, they actually updated their standards recently.
They did, yeah. Early 2021. And it's significant because they specifically wove cultural understanding right into their main competencies. It's even in the credentialing exam now.
So it's not just a nice to have anymore.
Not at all. It's core. They're basically saying cultural competence is essential for effective coaching anywhere in the world. It formalizes what, many great coaches probably did intuitively, but now it's explicit.
Okay, that really underlines why digging into Jennifer's experiences is so relevant now. So how are we going to structure this? Where do we start?
Well, her insights kind of naturally guide us through three key areas. First, we'll look at just how trust gets established in the first place, and crucially, how that can vary, sometimes dramatically, between cultures.
Okay, starting with the foundation. Makes sense.
Then, from there, we'll talk about adapting. How do you adjust your own style to meet people where they are? Thinking about, cultural norms, but also even individual learning preferences. It's like a constant calibration.
Dynamic, yeah. Not just a one-off change.
Exactly. And then third, we'll hit that point about projection. How do we stop ourselves from just assuming we know what someone else means or intends by what they say or do?
That one feels huge.
Yeah.
It seems like these three things, trust, adapting, not assuming they're all linked.
Right. Completely. It reminds me of this idea Jennifer talks about effective relationships needing this continuous alignment.
Continuous alignment. I like that.
Yeah, it's less about getting validated once and more about constantly checking in, making sure you're on the same page, sharing the same understanding, like continuously cultivating the relationship.
Cultivating, not just validating. Yeah. Okay, so let's start with that first piece then. How trust gets built. Where do our typical assumptions maybe lead us wrong?
Well, think about many Western cultures, like, say, the U.S. There's often this kind of baseline assumption of trust, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. Sort of like innocent until proven guilty. You meet someone, you generally assume you can engage unless they give you a reason not to.
Right. You might smile at a stranger, start a business conversation relatively quickly. Trust is often, extended first.
And then maybe pull back if something happens.
Exactly. But Jennifer's experience in India really highlights a different starting point. She observed, for example, that in some parts of India, making direct eye contact right away with someone you don't know might feel, well, maybe a bit too intense or forward.
Interesting. Not necessarily hostile, but just a bit much.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So in that kind of context, trust isn't just the default setting. It often needs to be actively built up. You have to earn it.
Yeah, what does that look like?
Through consistency, showing reliability over time, shared experiences matter a lot. It's less trust is assumed and more like you're doing an apprenticeship for credibility. You have to demonstrate you're trustworthy first.
Apprenticeship for credibility. Wow, that's a really vivid way to put it.
Yeah.
Did Jennifer share any specific examples that really drove this difference home for her?
Oh, yeah. A really fascinating one from her coaching practice in Kerala. She found it wasn't uncommon at all for a new client coming for their very first one-on-one session.
Yeah.
To bring someone else along with them.
Wait, really? To a confidential intake session? Like, who would they bring?
Could be anyone close. A spouse, maybe a really trusted colleague, sometimes even a close friend.
Wow. Okay, that's really different from a typical Western individualistic view.
Yeah.
Where, privacy and the client's individual journey are so central. Was Jennifer worried about confidentiality? How did she handle that?
She admitted it felt pretty unusual at first. Her initial reaction coming from her background was exactly that, concerns about confidentiality, keeping the focus individual. But she realized really quickly it wasn't about them distrusting her. It was the opposite, actually. It was a profound sign of respect. It showed that the client wanted to involve their trusted inner circle in what they saw as a significant decision embarking on coaching. It taps into a much more collective approach to big choices.
A collective approach. So it's not just about getting advice, it's deeper than that. What does it say about trust itself in that context?
It's like trust isn't just something you grant individually. It's more like a collective endorsement.
Collective endorsement.
Yeah. Getting approval, or at least involvement, from your most trusted people is part of the process of engaging with something new or important, like coaching. It shifts the focus from just the one-on-one relationship to the whole ecosystem of influence around that person.
That changes everything, doesn't it? Realizing trust might operate through this wider network. It's not just about you and the other person.
Exactly. And understanding that naturally leads into our second point, the need to adapt your own approach.
Right, because if trust works differently, your methods probably need to shift too.
Yeah.
Sounds like that dynamic calibration you mentioned.
Precisely. It's not a one-time fix. Once you start building that connection, or even while you're doing it, you have to keep adapting.
So how do we start? What kinds of things do we need to adapt to?
Well, think about something pretty basic, like learning styles. We all know people process information differently, right?
Sure. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic.
Exactly. Some people need to do it, get hands-on, that's kinesthetic. Others really grasp things by hearing them discussed auditory. And then you've got visual learners who need to see it, maybe diagrams, notes, that kind of thing.
So as a coach, or even just a colleague or manager, you can't just stick to your preferred method.
You really can't. You need that agility. You have to constantly observe, listen really carefully, and be ready to adjust your approach based on the cues you're getting. How does this person seem to best engage? It's less about a general reading the room and more like fine-tuning specifically to the individual in front of you.
Based on those subtle signals.
Yeah. And it goes way beyond just learning styles. Think about communication nuances.
Like language itself.
Oh, definitely. Jennifer pointed out huge variations, even within one language, like Spanish in Spain versus Mexico, or all the different ways Hindi is spoken across India. She mentioned Malayalam, which is specific just to Kerala, where she was.
And it's more than just the words, isn't it?
So much more. It's the rhythm, the pauses, what's not said, how direct or indirect people are. That varies massively.
Silence is a big one, too.
Huge. In some cultures, silence means I'm thinking, I'm respecting what you said, it's thoughtful.
Right. Whereas in others, too much silence can feel awkward, like maybe disagreement or that the person isn't engaged.
Exactly. You have to actively tune in. Jennifer mentioned noticing pauses in India that might feel like hesitation in a Western context, but were actually moments of deep, respectful thought. Misinterpreting that could be really problematic.
Definitely. Can you give us another one of Jennifer's examples? Something concrete where a small communication tweak made a big difference.
Yeah, there's a great one about how she started her coaching sessions. A pretty standard opening in many Western contexts might be something direct like, okay, what do you want to focus on today?
Very standard, task-oriented.
Right. But she found in her coaching in India that jumping straight into that didn't always land smoothly. It wasn't always the most effective opener.
So what did she do instead? What worked better?
She discovered that starting with something much simpler, more personal, like, have you had your lunch yet? Or did you have tea?
Asking about lunch, that seems so small. Why would that work better?
Well, think about it. That little question immediately shifts the focus. It's about the person, not just the task. And many cultures that are more high context, where meaning is often implied, or more collectivist, where relationships are paramount, building that personal rapport first is crucial. Showing you genuinely care about their well-being isn't just polite, it's often like a prerequisite for getting down to business.
So it bypasses the purely transactional feel.
Exactly. It goes straight to the relational. It says, I see you as a whole person. And that seemingly small step can really open the door for trust and deeper engagement.
That makes so much sense. It shows how these small adaptations can have a big impact. And it ties right into the third point, doesn't it? About not projecting our own meanings onto others.
It really does, because to adapt effectively, you first have to resist assuming you already know what's going on in the other person's head.
This feels like such a core principle. Whether you're coaching, leading, collaborating, you have to make a real effort to grasp their unique viewpoint, right? Their background, their experiences, and maybe crucially, their intent.
That's the key word, intent. And Jennifer uses this great analogy, thinking of culture like a fingerprint.
A fingerprint? How so?
It's unique to each individual. Even people from the same town, same family, they'll still have their own distinct take based on their specific life experiences.
Right. So if it's that unique even close up, imagine the differences when you scale up across regions or countries. You're bound to run into perspectives totally outside your own frame of reference. Didn't Jennifer have a story about driving related to this?
Ah, yes, the driving story. Okay, so let's paint the picture. You need to imagine these roads in India, often narrow, very busy, maybe a bit chaotic.
Okay, yeah.
So this professional, he's recounting learning to drive as a teenager, and his father teaches him something about making a U-turn that, well, it completely threw Jennifer, the coach.
Oh, what was it?
His dad's advice was pretty blunt. He said, just stop. Stop right there in the middle of the road. Make the turn. Yeah. Even, he said, if cars behind you are honking like crazy.
Wow. Okay, stop. Middle of the road. Honking. My immediate reaction, probably like Jennifer's, especially coming from, say, a U.S. driving background.
Right.
That sounds like, well, it's not the first thing that comes to mind. Or, a recipe for an accident.
Exactly. That was Jennifer's gut reaction too. But here's the twist. The father's reasoning. It wasn't actually about traffic flow or rules.
Yeah.
No. His intention was about teaching his son something else entirely. How to manage intense stress. How to stay absolutely calm under that kind of pressure, the honking, the chaos, and just focus on the goal, completing the U-turn safely.
So the U-turn itself was almost secondary. The real lesson was stress management and focus.
Precisely. It was about mental resilience, not just maneuvering a car.
And that must have been the moment for Jennifer, that aha moment.
Yeah.
Realizing the why, the intent behind that advice, it forces you to stop, doesn't it? To consciously check your own immediate judgment, your own cultural programming about what's right or wrong on the road.
Totally.
It makes it clear that the lesson, the deep lesson, was embedded in the context, in the reason for the action, not just the action itself. It kind of reframes the whole thing.
It really does. And this story, I think, it perfectly illustrates a much bigger point. Actions don't happen in a vacuum. They're framed by culture, by context, by personal intent.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want genuine understanding, we can't just look at the what someone did. We have to dig deeper, try to uncover the why. We project so much otherwise.
Absolutely. And, this isn't just driving. Think about how this applies everywhere. Mm-hmm. How do people share support in different cultures?
Right.
How is rapport built? What does a certain gesture mean?
Absolutely. Gestures, posture, how we use space, it all varies. Jennifer shared another personal experience, this one from facilitating a corporate training session in India.
Yeah.
In the U.S., it's pretty common for a facilitator, maybe to seem more informal and approachable, to casually sit on the edge of a desk or a table while talking to the group.
Yeah, I've seen that done a lot. It kind of breaks down the formal barrier and makes it feel more relaxed.
Right, trying to create that connection. So Jennifer did this in India, hopped up onto the edge of the boardroom table while she was speaking.
How did that go over?
Not well at all. She said people looked visibly uncomfortable. Some even seemed quite offended by it.
Oof. That must have felt awful. Realizing something meant to connect actually created distance or offense. What did she do?
Well, she noticed the reaction pretty quickly. So she immediately stood up, changed her position. But crucially, she didn't just ignore it or pretend it didn't happen.
Oh.
She addressed it directly. She actually used her own mistake as a live teaching moment right there in the session. Talked about cross-cultural differences, the importance of checking assumptions, understanding local customs regarding space and hierarchy, perhaps.
Wow, turning a potential blunder into a learning opportunity. That takes some quick thinking and humility.
It really does. And both these stories, the driving and the table, they really underscore how powerful that don't assume principle is, especially when you pair it with genuine curiosity.
Right. It's not just about not assuming. It's about actively seeking the other person's meaning.
Exactly. It's about shifting your language. Instead of making assumptions and stating them as facts, maybe try gentler observations like, I noticed X, or asking permission, is it okay if I share something I observed?
It feels less confrontational, more inviting.
Yeah. And then the really key step, consciously hands the meaning making over to them. Ask open-ended questions like, how would you define this situation? Or what does that mean to you? Maybe even, what word would you use for that feeling?
Letting them use their own words. That sounds incredibly respectful.
It demonstrates huge respect.
Yeah.
It opens the door to their actual reality, not your interpretation of it.
And practically speaking, you start to learn their vocabulary, right?
Yep.
Not just the language, but their specific terms, their internal jargon, how they frame things, like learning the lingo in a new workplace.
It's exactly like that. Making that effort to understand their world, their context, their meaning. Trust just grows organically from that effort. It happens naturally.
It really strikes me how these three things we've talked about, earning trust, adapting your style, and consciously avoiding assumptions, they aren't really separate techniques, are they?
Not at all. They're completely interconnected, like threads woven together in a strong piece of fabric. Well, you adapt your style in order to build trust. You avoid making assumptions because that demonstrates respect and helps you adapt appropriately, which in turn builds trust. They all reinforce each other.
They work together synergistically, creating that solid foundation for the relationship you mentioned earlier.
Precisely. That continuous alignment relies on all three working together.
This has been incredibly insightful, really practical stuff rooted in that real-world experience.
It's powerful when you see it in action.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe one final thought for people to take away.
Yeah, maybe something to reflect on is this. How might really understanding these nuances about trust, about communication styles, especially across cultures, how might that change the way you approach your own professional relationships? Even the ones you think you know really, really well already, could there be assumptions you're making even there?
That's a great question to ponder. Makes you rethink things. If people want to learn more about Jennifer Kumar's work.
Yeah, definitely look her up. Jennifer Kumar on LinkedIn is a good place to start.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing these insights today.
My pleasure.
And thanks everyone for tuning in to this deep dive.